All right. Yes, welcome to the April MPO TAC meeting. I'm showing here as folks in the meeting so far are myself from RPC, Scott Vogel from RPC, Brad Nichols from Coast, Richard McDermott from Hampton Falls, Danya Siegley from Rye, Lee Levine from Federal Highways, Lucy St. John from NHDOT, Paul Maloney from Federal Highways, Peter Coffin from Kingston, Tim White from NHDES, and a new addition to our group here at RPC, we have Tricia Cheever, who is our new transportation GIS analyst in the office, who's joining us. Lucky her, she gets to sit in on these meetings. So, but Tricia started, what is it, a month ago now, 3 weeks ago now?
About a month.
Yeah,
Just there.
He's an old timer.
Yeah, she's already an old hat, at this, and so yeah, no, fitting in nicely, getting stuff done, which is what we like. So, all right, I think that's everybody that I have at the meeting at this moment. I know there's, this is vacation week, April vacation week, so there's a few people who I expect are off on vacation with their children, sort of like Scott, except Scott's working.
Do we have enough folks here for Rad to start his presentation?
I think, yeah, we might as well get going.
It's up to you, Rad.
Great, thank you. I'll share my screen. So this is a modification of our 2021 impact report, sort of updated for 2022 as we've gotten a little more than halfway through our fiscal year. And I will not be able to see you all while I do this. So if you have a question, pipe up, or I'm happy to answer questions at the end too. So.
Okay. Thanks, Rad.
Yeah, thanks, Rad.
Can you see the presentation versus the presenter slides at this point?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
So you can, I will send a copy of this to Dave afterwards, so don't bother reading all of this. I would just say it is a time of transition for us at Coast. We're welcoming back more riders all the time, which is fantastic as we sort of continue to slowly emerge from the pandemic. We're finding out what the new bipartisan infrastructure law and the funding impacts of that mean for us. Generally speaking, more federal money, which is good. We are suffering through the impacts of high gas prices just like everybody else, but really trying to promote public transit as an alternative to filling up that gas tank, which for me last night was $67. And a monthly pass at Coast for unlimited rides and unlimited miles is 52. So and we are progressing on plans for our new 48,000 square foot facility at Coast on our current site. That's pretty exciting, and some funding is starting to come in for that. So we've got more grants in the works. So, and finally, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary of providing service to the region, which is pretty exciting. As an organization, we've really been focused on our core mission over those 40 years. We've provided just over 15.6 million passenger trips, and it's a really nice milestone to have reached. Of course, we are our biggest part of our services are our fixed routes. We offer 9 local and 4 regional routes connecting 10 communities in New Hampshire and Maine. We make connections with Wildcat Transit, C&J bus lines, Concord Coach, Greyhound, the Downeaster, and Allegiant Air through our system. So once you get on our bus, you can go anywhere. Hourly headways on all of our routes with easy to remember clock face schedules. That was a big part of our redesign between 2018 and 2020. And we offer really nice, timely connections between our services in Rochester, Dover, and Portsmouth, which we didn't always have in the past. And we're affordable. It's $1.50 to board or 75 cents for older adults and individuals living with disabilities. And right now we actually have a free transfer pilot program we're running. So if you need to transfer between one bus to another, you don't pay an additional fare. As I mentioned, we went through a big redesign between 2018 and 2020. So riders who haven't rode with us since the beginning of the pandemic are finding out we're not the same public transit system that they knew before. We had to alter our services in 2020 due to changes in our funding streams. And we do look very different now than we did before the pandemic hit. For example, the number one question we get is, where's Route 2? And the answer is there's no such thing anymore. Route 2 is now a combination of routes 12 and 13. So people are rediscovering the new coast. One of the most rewarding things that I say we do at Coast is helping older adults and individuals living with disabilities live as independent a life as they can. And we have a number of services that we offer that allow them to do that. In Stratford and Eastern Rockingham counties, we have our ADA paratransit service. We have our Route 7 on-demand service between Exeter, Stratham, and Newmarket. We operate senior transportation with a partnership with the city of Portsmouth. We offer community rides, which is a program under the Alliance for Community Transportation, sort of a service of last resort for folks. We provide accessible volunteer driver program rides for Ready Rides. We are starting to do more work with contracted non-emergency transportation with area medical sites. And then we're in yellow for a reason. We're going to propose to our board in May that we start operating a general public demand response service. It will be a service of last resort and quite expensive because we're looking to recover the costs of our providing that service. TripLink, whoop, sorry, where did I go? I got ahead of myself there, sorry about that. TripLink, this is the regional call center that was created through the Alliance for Community Transportation and their work on coordinating regional public transit and human service transportation across the region. The regional call center is an amazing resource for community-based transportation services in Southeast New Hampshire. Do a lot of work with information and referral, but also we have a number of programs that are, people can call in and book rides, make their reservations, and we schedule out for Coast and other providers to provide those trips. This winter, we also launched a new website that the biggest part of that launch was we have a new universal application for services in the region. Multiple agencies are using. And the idea is that we get people to sign up once in the system and they get qualified for as many services as we can possibly qualify them for at one time. It takes a process that can be somewhat daunting and involve a lot of paperwork and really streamlines it. And we're honestly not aware of any other similar application across the country. I think we may have created something unique and really are taking the lead in that area. So it's pretty exciting. positive feedback is what keeps us motivated and coming back to do our important work every day. And we get an awful lot of it from our customers. And I think that's a result of a great team that we've been able to put together who's dedicated to our mission. So we thrive on that feedback. The jointly produced economic impact analysis that was produced by RPC and SRPC last year was really an important piece of work that documented the value and economic impact of our public transit service to the region. And some of the most powerful parts of that report to me were some of the quotes from business leaders across the region. And I think they really spoke some truths. And I would add that they were using fiscal year 19 data at the time. In fiscal year 22, our impact on the regional economic activity is actually estimated at about $27 million. So what used to be 25 million is now 27 million. And in that report, how was that divided up? The planning commissions looked at our regional economic impact of our spending, which was estimated around 14.28 million, and then the regional impact of access provided by Coast, which was 11.6 million. So there you get the $25 million regional economic impact. So you can't talk about public transit these days without talking about the impacts of COVID-19, and they've been significant. So there's four kind of areas here I'll close out with, and the pandemic is one. So we've been really focused on reducing risk for our staff and our riders, and doing everything we can to make the bus as safe as possible. Unfortunately, riding public transit continues to be perceived as a risky behavior, despite really any lack of evidence showing that it is. I'll say that a bus is a really drafty box that has more fresh air coming in it than you would imagine. And the one thing that we did do also with our HVAC systems in the buses is we've installed ionizers that effectively sterilize the air as it goes through and is recirculated. So lots of fresh air and sterilizing the air that does get recycled. We have had significant negative impacts to certain key revenues, and they continue to be ongoing despite the economic recovery. They've been lagging. The pandemic has really hit commercial driving and the availability of commercial drivers. The workforce as a whole is older, and a lot of people have decided to retire and not come back. We also have a lot of new competition from the private delivery driving jobs that have really exploded in the economy, as well as the fact that training schools were shut down for a while, and so there was no new pipeline of trainees coming out looking for those jobs. CARES and American Rescue Plan Act funds have been critical for us. They will continue to be critical for us for another 2-3 years probably, quite honestly. So because that's about how long it'll probably take us to fully recover. And we've really been trying to be as straightforward and regularly communicating to our customers as possible about the challenges of the pandemic, what we're doing, and how we're trying to make riding public transit as safe as possible. For our employees, they have been impacted by COVID-19. They've been out of work because of cases or potential cases of COVID-19, and that's ongoing. We really got hit hard in January of this year, and There's a little spike going on again now, even just like everywhere else in the region. We did try to implement policies in the early days to encourage folks to stay home and sort of disincentivize coming into work and helping spread COVID-19. And it's worked really well. And our employees have really appreciated that. And I think it's helped us come through the pandemic without greater impacts. What's going on in ridership? We're recovering slowly. I'll say in March, we had the highest ridership we'd had of any month since the beginning of the pandemic. Going back to March of 2020, it was great to see. We're consistently about 60 to 65% of our pre-pandemic levels when comparing back to fiscal year 19. So it's coming back. It's coming back slowly. That's on our fixed route services. On demand response, so this is our ADA paratransit services, Portsmouth Senior Transportation, Route 7 on demand, those services. We're coming back a little faster. Varies a little bit more month to month based on the number of COVID cases in the region. January, February, ridership dropped quite a bit, but it came roaring back in March. So, but we're around 70 to 75% of our pre-pandemic levels on demand response services. Some of those revenue impacts that I talked about earlier and where we are today. So you can see what we look like in 19, 20, 21, and so far through 22 for fare box and contract revenues. Big hit. We don't carry as many people as we used to. Advertising revenues, this was a big revenue stream for us pre-pandemic, was really hit hard initially. Tons and tons of cancellations of contracts. Sales right now are fantastic. Collections lag. So if you look at our buses today and our bus shelters today, there's a lot of paid advertisements out there. Collections usually lag by 2-3 months, and a lot of sales happen through the course of the winter. So looking up, but still major impacts. And then, how are we making those up? Well, CARES and American Rescue Plan Act funding is so our federal funding is way up, which will run out in probably about 3 years. So we've got to find solutions and get back to where we were. One of the ways we get back to where, one of the ways we offset those CARES and ARPA funds are increases in federal funding for the FTA under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So highest levels of public transit funding ever across the US will represent about a $4.7 million increase in FTA funding to the state of New Hampshire. So about 24% overall. At Coast, we'll receive about a 28.9% increase in our FTA 5307 allocation, which is how we fund the majority of our services. Those are small urban funds that are allocated to the Dover, Rochester, and Portsmouth UZAs. The catch on all of these increases in federal funding is that they require match. So if we are going to spend that additional $4.7 million of FTA funding coming into the state, potential to need to raise about $3.4 million of additional local match to leverage all of it. And I say potential because it's not, how these funds are used will vary by transit system And sometimes it's a 50% match, sometimes it's an 80% match. So in some cases, I've sort of blended it in between. But good news, we just need to find the match, and can have a really significant impact on the state. Less so with inflationary pressures that we're experiencing right now, though, unfortunately. We are, like I mentioned before, we are actively planning for a new facility for our next 40 years at Coast. Big expansion going from what we have today, which if you see, there's a blue dashed line here in the parking lot and in the staff outside area. That is our current facility. So you see the footprint is dramatically larger. This area here, I think you can probably see my cursor, is the admin and operations offices. This is all garage with 4 maintenance bays and then a drive-through fueling and wash bay. And then this structure here is an indoor, now why did it do that? An indoor bus storage facility. We estimate that we'll save about $70,000 a year in annual operating costs by building this facility. One of the reasons why is we won't have to lease space off-site any longer. Plus, we'll be incorporating solar array to help power our facility. We're also looking to make sure that when we build the facility, we construct it in such a way that it will allow us to eventually switch to an electric fleet and electric charging. So we will build in that capacity at the time of construction. I think the biggest challenge is we need to generate just under $3 million of match funds. We've got applications into the New Hampshire CDFA for the tax credit program to generate about $500,000 in revenues that way in support of the facility. And we've also got an earmark request into Senator Shaheen and Congressman Pappas for $2 million of HUD EDI funds that can match federal Transit Administration dollars. So maybe 2.5 of that $3 million we've got in play. Hopefully, we'll see how that pans out. And then, as I mentioned, we're really trying to promote public transit as a ready-made solution to the current prices for gas. And we're there. We're operating. We can help get you there. We understand we're not everywhere, but where public transit is operating, we think we are a competitive opportunity to save a lot against your monthly budget. So 52 rides, unlimited miles, or $52 for a monthly pass, unlimited rides, unlimited miles versus maybe a tank of gas, maybe half a tank of gas. So we've put out this campaign on social media, put it on the backs of some of our vehicles, and is in our bus shelters. Hopefully you may have seen that. And then sort of a recap of our forecast for fiscal year 22 and some updates. We did really improve our family healthcare plan option for eligible staff this year, our 2-person and family healthcare plan. So hopefully that helps make us more competitive in the job marketplace. That was a great achievement. We did receive funding for some new replacement vehicles, low floor minibuses, a new style vehicle that will help us help reduce our reliance on CDL licensed operators. And hopefully we'll have those in operation within the next 9 to 12 months. We're finalizing the specifications for them now. We're piloting a 6-month trial of a new free transfer system, and we're looking at new technology that would allow us to have electronic fare payment on board the buses as well. We're about 4 months into the pilot program and expect that the board will be acting on recommendations probably at the May meeting, but potentially as late as June. The pilot runs through June, so we'd like to make decisions in May to give folks enough advance notice to know what we're doing beyond June. We're actively introducing new marketing campaign to encourage ridership to come back. We just announced our 40th anniversary. It's a Ruby anniversary, hence the red in the logo. That's not a normal color at Coast, but we thought we'd recognize it that way. And then, of course, we're always actively pursuing new sources of local match to support our ongoing operation. And we've put in some legislative policy proposals to the New Hampshire Municipal Association to encourage that. Our input on potential legislation always references that, and the need, particularly given the bipartisan infrastructure law and the increases in those federal funds, to if we're going to leverage those, then we've got to somehow generate more local match in the state. Quite honestly, I think the cities and towns are contributing their fair share, and it would be great to see the state up their participation. So, and with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions that folks may have.
I'll start with a question. That's fantastic, Rad. It seems like you're making some great progress on a lot of these sort of initiatives that you've undertaken. My question, I guess, is I remember probably dating myself here, maybe back to the 2008 timeframe, and where gas prices were up over $3, and that had a big impact on your ridership in terms of, it boosted your ridership significantly, if I remember right, because people were like, oh, $3 gas, oh my. And now that we're at $4 gas, I'm wondering, are you seeing that same sort of boost, or is that, do you think that's being offset by COVID kind of concerns still?
I think that the ridership we saw in March was partially due to the price of gas. I think it's also the first real month of where we start to get nicer weather, and we always see a bounce back in March. I think that COVID is tampering ridership from coming back stronger given the price of gas, because people still are very concerned about being in a space like that. So, and I'll be interested to see what happens to ridership with the removal of the mask mandate. I think there's a lot of people that are really happy about that. I know it is a whole lot easier to be a bus driver now than it was when the mask mandate was in place. That was the #1 sort of rub of passengers, and the conflict point. But I'm concerned that some of the folks that have come back might choose not to ride again. We'll see how that plays out. But like I said,
Yeah.
big drafty boxes with lots of fresh air.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I can't recall any instances where I heard of a major sort of COVID hotspot focused around transit or,
No,
or any sort of mass transportation at all. I mean, so.
no, there's been nothing reported on that at all. So.
Twofold, Brad. I noticed that you are expending some money to have smaller vehicles to reduce the CDL link, if you will.
Yeah.
Which is good. But another question, we had a profile of a bus driver, looked like a man from space or a person from space. What was the contraption that was surrounding this individual?
Oh yeah, so we've something that I fought for a long time. And something that is now almost universal in the industry is a barrier that separates the driver from passengers when they board.
Gotcha.
So it's a clear plexiglass barrier on the top, and on the bottom it's the ones that we have in our big buses are, it's a pretty significant door structure. I never wanted those in the past because I thought, you go to step on the bus and you look up at the driver behind a barrier and you're thinking to yourself, how safe is it to ride this thing? Why does a driver need to be hidden, protected by a barrier? Now, honestly, I'm really happy we have them. We're having the same issues that you're seeing reported, not to the same severity and that you're seeing, but there's a lot of issues on public transit across the country. A lot of it stems to mental health challenges, and so I'm really happy we have those barriers.
Good.
Unfortunately.
Scott?
Brad, could you say a little bit more about the indoor bus storage? I mean, my understanding is there's some benefits there in terms of longevity of the vehicles and probably some air quality benefits, since you don't need to, have the diesel engines idling for as long to get them warmed up if they're stored inside.
Yep. So particularly the real benefit to that is in the wintertime, and what we have to do to clear off the tops of buses when it snows, or these days when they ice over. And there's a lot of challenges there. There's a lot of safety issues there, quite honestly. But when we're using roof rakes to clean off snow and ice off the tops of the buses, it creates it helps create situations where the roofs will leak, and then you have water penetration, and once you have water penetration, you're asking for problems with the electrical system and on and on. So plus we are, we'll have people coming in 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing you do is start up the buses and get them going to, one, find out which ones are going to start, and two, start to get them to warm up just even a little bit. So they may sit there for 2 hours idling, unfortunately, so that the first rides of the day are not in 30-degree ice box. The indoor bus storage facility will probably heat it to something between 50 and 55 degrees, so that we can start up the buses and just go. There's no idling involved anymore. And we don't have to clean off the tops of the buses, which is fantastic. Plus, that cold start, it's hard on the engines, quite honestly. And if we can keep them in a 50-degree facility, that really helps them out.
Thanks.
Yep.
Brad, what's the timetable for moving into the new facility?
Well, Tim, if everything went smooth, we're talking spring of 2025. We're so big grants that we need to have come through. The New Hampshire CDFA tax credit application that we'll hear about in June. The earmark that we've put in for federal fiscal year 23. We'll probably, we'll hear about when the federal fiscal year 23 budget gets approved. Whenever that is, sometime between, October and what was it this year? March. And then we have a FTA 5339B capital grant that will go in at the end of May for the balance of FTA funds we need. We were awarded funds under 5339A, which is managed by the DOT. We got a considerable amount of funding through that. So we need another 7.7 million or so through the 5339B program. We applied last fall, were not successful, but in a consult with the program manager, we weren't that far off either. So I think that our application this time around, we can probably, there's 5 categories where you get assessed, and I think we can reach the highest level of assessment, highly recommended in all 5 of those categories. So I'm hopeful that we'll be successful this time around.
Tim, is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Danya? Danya,
I'm here. I was unmuting. I'm sorry.
okey doke.
Thank you. Rod, that was excellent. Thank you very much. I'm a relatively newcomer to the Seacoast, and I was very impressed to see the footprint that Coast has, and delighted to have had more information provided by you. I was really very much encouraged that you're incorporating new technologies, environmentally friendly technologies, as in your expansion initiative, particularly the solar array and the electric buses. Can you speak a little bit more about how you might incorporate that in the plans if you're able? Thank you.
So for the solar arrays, we're looking at putting solar on top of the bus storage building, as well as potentially the other building. If we put the solar array only on top of the bus storage facility, they're projecting that will meet our daily need for electricity for the entire facility. If we had a larger solar array, then we have the capacity to either sell that back to the system or incorporate it into battery storage for fleet charging. I think the biggest part of the planning for the potential conversion of the fleet is to make sure we have space for battery storage for the fleet, because there'll be times where we need that battery storage to help with charging, and also to plan for the sort of the supply side of electricity and make sure that we have enough throughput. So we'll be meeting with our supplier Eversource to talk through that and plan for that and make sure that there's enough, we have enough throughput to do what we need to do with a electric fleet. I think the biggest challenge that we have right now with moving to an electric fleet is the fact that most of our fixed routes are out on the road long enough and traveling far enough. There is not a vehicle being made currently that has the
Battery range.
Yeah, thank you. The range that we need, without, having to swap vehicles midday. And when you're swapping vehicles midday, then you're introducing new costs that quite honestly we can't afford. So the other thing is a new, and we just purchased 4 new clean diesel buses. They're just over $500,000 a piece. A new all electric bus or hybrid bus is closer to $1 million a piece. So there's a significant upcharge for that. And New Hampshire doesn't have that sort of funding coming into our state to do much of that.
Brad, as a follow-on to that, given
Thank you, Rod.
the range of some of your routes that you're referring to, I'm assuming that in your discussions with Eversource, you're going to be looking at the possibility of DC fast charging as well as level 2 charging for those buses.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim.
Okay.
Moving right along here. Any other questions? It looks like Dave Walker, Transportation Project Solicitation.
All right. Thanks, Fred. I appreciate
Thank
all
you,
that.
Red.
Thank
More
you.
questions than we've ever had.
All right, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And so let's see. Probably going to switch. All right, are you seeing the full?
Yes, well, no,
It's going to move real fast because I managed to start it not at the beginning. So, all right, so you're seeing the RPC transportation project solicitation and prioritization?
yes.
All right, excellent. That's what we want. All
We
right,
see the small one, we see the small one too.
Yeah, the next slide we see, but that's all right.
okay,
Don't
so
waste time. That's fine. It's big enough on the big screen.
how's that?
Review.
Looks
There we
good.
go.
Oh,
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. So it's messing with me today. Usually I have to swap it at the beginning because it shows the presenter view by default for some reason on my screen, but today it's swapping that on me. So, all right, I'm going to just go through quickly sort of a preview, sort of overview of our project solicitation prioritization process and kind of a preview of how we're going to approach it this round. We don't need to make any decisions on anything today. It's really just kind of overview and get any feedback that you might have initially. So as we all know, the New Hampshire transportation planning process really involves 3 documents. The MPO Long Range Transportation Plan, which is a 20-year or more planning document, the state 10-year plan, which is sort of the queue of projects that are ready for implementation or moving towards implementation, and then the MPO Transportation Improvement Program, which is actual implementation of these projects. And we kind of think of them with the long range plan being really project concepts and ideas. And the 10-year plan is where we start to see real sort of development of those projects and the engineering and that kind of things beginning. And then, of course, the TIP is where they get implemented. So in our long range plan currently, we have about 140 projects in the region at about, almost, let's see, $635 million worth of construction and projects, various projects to be implemented. 50 of those projects are actually in the 10-year plan and the TIP. And that's about 1/3 of the funding for those projects. And each of those documents have a process for developing them. The long range transportation plan is updated on a 4 to 5 year time frame. And we update parts of it though every 2 years in concert with the TIP and the 10-year plan cycle. But really, when we do a full update of the project, of the long range plan, we go, start with our existing conditions data and work to get that data updated. We develop goals and objectives, integrate our planning factors that we get from the federal government. We do an assessment of what needs are out there and what we expect future trends are going to bring up. We do an assessment of system performance, and then we draft a plan, draft a project list, and then prioritize those projects. And that's where we start to feed into the 10-year plan process. And then we draft the document, and then we adopt the document. And so some of those things, like the items like 5 through 9, happen every 2 years, while items 1 through 4 happen on a less frequently. So that's a 4 to 5 year time frame. The 10-year plan has a sort of similar cycle, but it's done on a 2-year time frame, and it kind of starts with work from the RPCs on identifying projects. We identify and prioritize projects for the 10-year plan, go through a whole process on that, and from that, DOT starts drafting the 10-year plan based on our new priorities, as well as the existing projects that are in there, as well as other considerations like, you know, priorities from the bridge program and priorities from the district maintenance offices and that kind of thing. Goes through a whole review process through the GASIC hearings, which happen in the fall. And the governor reviews and amends it and sends it to the legislature, which reviews and amends it. And that's where it's at this point, I think, is in the legislature. The governor signs it into law, and then the approved 10-year plan is published. And from that, we pull out the first 4 years to make the state transportation improvement program and the regional transportation improvement program. And so there's a whole process that goes into those as well. And so those two those two cycles kind of interact in a couple of spots. So on one hand, the work that we've got that goes into an adopted long-range transportation plan feeds back into our priorities for the 10-year plan, right? Because the projects that are in that adopted long-range plan form the basis of what we decide to, what we're prioritizing, right? In the end, also, the tip and so the first 4 years of the 10-year plan, and which is the tip, those projects are fed back in to ensure that there's consistency between the tip and the long-range plan. So once the tip is drafted, the long-range plan gets revised to ensure that the projects sort of align in time and cost as in both documents. Oops, sorry about that. Very sensitive mouse button today. But you know, we talk about the item 1 where we're talking about the MPO 10-year plan priorities, right? And so it shows up as one part of the cycle of the 10-year plan process, but that's a really involved process for the MPO. And then it takes like 6 to 8 months to pull that off. And there's a number of steps that are involved. And so, you know, it's more than just that one circle on the screen. So I'm just going to sort of step through each of these pieces and talk a little bit about what we've got coming up for that. So on step 1, which is our project solicitation, I sent out the letter in the attachment that talked about soliciting projects to communities. That's a draft at this point. We're still working on tweaking that. And I'm thinking I'm actually going to have to back up the due date for projects a little bit due to sort of time crunch, basically. So maybe we'll be soliciting projects from communities and our regional transit agencies probably between middle of May and the middle of July. And we'll be asking them about priorities of projects that are already in the long-range plan and the 10-year plan to make sure that those are, you know, any projects that are in a particular community in the plan, whether those are still priorities, just to make sure that those are things that they still want to see moving forward. And also asking for updated information on those projects if they are still in the plan, or is there a new person in town to contact about it? Do you have better information on what you want the scope to be, or a better understanding of cost, that kind of thing? And then we'll ask also for any newly identified projects, right? Are there new things that you want to see? Or even if you don't have a new project, is there a transportation issue that's been you know, being talked about or discussed in the community that it hasn't maybe risen to the point where there's a project yet, but it's something that you're identifying and trying to work on, and we can incorporate that into the plan as well. So as part of that, we're developing a web-based form for submitting and updating projects, and it's going to be tied to the GIS system, so that basically we'll have in the end, the goal is to have one database that's sort of a unified database of all projects. So you'll be able to enter information about your projects into this system, and even point it out on a map where they are and what the scale, what the size of the project is and what parts of the road it encompasses and that sort of thing. But also we'll be able to go back in and maybe it might be through sort of a separate process, but it'll be connected to this and allow you to edit existing projects. So you can see the information that we have on a project in your community and make sure that it's up to date and make sure we have the right contact people and the right scope and that kind of thing. So we'll be able to, hopefully that will streamline the whole collection of information about projects. So when we're talking about evaluating projects, so once we get all the projects collected, those that are existing in the plan, as well as any new ones we've received, we sort of run through a quick evaluation of those projects. So we look at whether they need to stay in the long range plan. Can we drop this project if there's no community feedback that they're still interested in the project, or if it just doesn't seem like something that's viable for some reason, we might drop a project. And then we'll be checking and updating any data for completeness to try to get as much information about these projects as we can going into the prioritization process. And then as part of this, we also classify the projects into 3 groups that we've used for the past couple of cycles, with looking at local projects, regional projects, and interregional projects. And then we also look in general at, is a project a good fit for the 10-year plan? Is there some reason that it shouldn't be in the 10-year plan or is not likely to be funded in the 10-year plan, that kind of thing? So those are the kind of questions we're asking. And as I said, we focus on grouping the projects into 3 groups based on the general scale of the benefits of the project. And so we're looking at local projects, which are those which are improving access and connections within communities, regional projects, which are doing that same type of thing between communities in our region. And then the interregional projects are the sort of the bigger scale projects, or the ones that connect our region to other parts of the state or to other states. And so it helps us kind of, it's not a 100% apples to apples comparison within those. I mean, we're still considering, roadway improvement projects and bike and pedestrian projects sort of in the same pot, but they're about the same scale. So it's a little bit more, rather than being maybe apples and oranges, it's like apples and pears or something. So it's a little bit closer and a little bit easier to sort of categorize those a little bit. So the project selection process, which will follow later this summer and into the fall a little bit, we first look at a couple of things just to make sure that we're looking at candidates that are viable for the 10-year plan. We look whether the project is feasible and whether it's supported by the local community and it's eligible for federal funding programs. And then we apply the project selection criteria that we've used over the last several cycles. And so those project selection criteria are looking at economic development factors, equity, environmental justice, and accessibility factors, mobility, natural hazards, resiliency, network significance, safety, state of repair, and support, and that's local and regional support. And I don't expect, we're still working on this at the state level through the sort of the state transportation planners group that we have. But I don't expect that we'll see major changes to these types of what we're seeing in terms of project selection criteria, because we're focusing this time on sort of improving the guidance for implementation for the RPCs. And so trying to help out answer questions for folks that haven't been doing this for very long and maybe need some additional assistance in sort of guiding them through this process. So. And as part of using those project selection criteria, we'll do a weighting process where we set the category weights for each of those 8, 8 categories. And so all of those will total up to be 100% of the score for each project. Last round, we set different weights for each grouping of projects. And they were fairly close across the board with only a few percentage points often between them. At this point, I'm still thinking we'll do that same type of process, unless there are major objections from the TAC on that. So here's where things maybe are getting a little bit different from how we've done it in the past. So once we've prioritized the projects, what we've done in past rounds is take the top 5 from scoring projects from each of the 3 groupings. All right, and bring that to TAC as a short list that we then have to try to constrain a little bit to send to DOT for project engineering and review. In this round, what we're going to try to do is try to contract with an engineering firm ourselves to try to do that project engineering and sort of refining the scope and cost estimates. And that would happen sort of late in the summer, early in the fall. Ideally, I would love to have all 15 projects looked at. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that, given we don't know what the cost of that might be at this point and the time that it may require to do all 15 projects. So once we have an engineering contractor on board, we can refine this number down a little bit to see what's a viable amount of projects that we can send to the project engineers or to the engineers to get a refined scope and estimate. So we may have to adjust this a little bit going forward. Once we've got that short list done, whatever the length of that short list is, we'll be submitting a set of candidate projects to NHDOT for their review as well. And that will happen November-ish timeframe. So we'll be trying to take those 3 lists of projects and compress it into a single list of priorities for implementation in the 10-year plan. And so this is often, it's a short subset of the short list. Last round, I think, sent 5 projects to DOT for them to evaluate. And in the end, we got 1 project into the 10-year plan, and it took a large portion of our share of funding. We need to constrain it to a regional budget target, which has not changed from previous rounds. So we're still dealing with about $6.7 million worth of funding for the 2-year cycle. But we can send projects up to our target plus 2 additional projects to DOT for consideration. So ideally, we would sort of try to at least get sent to our private engineering contractor that number of projects that could meet that requirement. But again, we'll see how that's all going to shake out once we understand the costs a little better later this spring. So we'll be bringing that to the TAC for a final recommendation in the September meeting, and with policy committee meeting approval in October. That being said, depending on the exact date when NHDOT needs our submittals, we might be able to shift that to the October TAC and the November meeting if the due date to NHDOT is a week later than it was last year. So we'll see where that still is in the works as well. So NHDOT will do their scope and cost review over the winter. Basically between November and February is when they did their work last round. And here are the 5 projects that we sent last round, and in which, of course, we did get the East Coast Greenway project funded in the end. But they basically will look at the scope and costs of those projects and offer recommendations for changes and refinements in the scope and the estimate. The goal is that will be an easy process for them this time, since we'll have had professional engineers look at the projects ahead of them going to DOT. So the hope is we can avoid some of the things like we had to discuss last cycle, where we had projects where we DOT didn't have enough information to make an informed estimate on it. Like that Bartlett Street Bridge in Portsmouth. We want to avoid that kind of thing in the future, simply because I think it just waste everybody's time trying to figure these things out when we don't have enough information about a project. So we want to try to avoid that going forward. So after DOT has done their cost review, the projects then come back to us and we make a final call on what our priorities are for the 10-year plan. And we need to constrain that to a regional budget target. And would be looking at the February TAC and March policy meeting for finalizing those priorities to get them to DOT by the end of March of next year. So slightly under a year from now. And so that this process timeline is really just laying out what I just talked about through this. You know, we're going to solicit projects beginning of the summer here, end of the spring, beginning of the summer. We'll work on our project development and classification in the same time frame, as well as trying to sort of set our project selection process and criteria weighting in that same time frame, so that by the time that July deadline hits for projects, communities know how their projects will be evaluated. And then we'll be looking shortly after that to set up a short list for engineering review, getting that engineering review done, and then drafting our priorities to, or sending our draft priorities to DOT in the fall again, and then finalizing our priorities in the spring once DOT has had a chance to look at them. So that concludes the slides that I have. I'm going to stop sharing maybe and into my Zoom screen.
Any questions, folks?
Oh, there we are. So
Peter, you're looking like you want to ask a question.
No, I originally had a question about how much funding was available for this, and David jumped right in when I was and answered that question about, well, we don't know yet. And compare. My original assumption was that the stuff that we submitted to the state, they paid for the engineering studies, but it sounds from Dave like there's a budget that we're using our money, our regional money, using that, so that I didn't know where this money would come from for the private engineering firm.
okay, so yeah, so just to clarify on that, then we're using our planning funds, our transportation planning funds that we get, which are federal funds. DOT did authorize an extra $20,000 for this cycle, specifically to be spent on doing that initial kind of scoping and cost estimates for 10-year plan proposals, right? Basically to try to get better projects or a better understanding of the projects that are being requested to be added to the 10-year plan. So we have that $20,000. In addition, we may spend a little bit extra in terms of our planning funds just to make sure that we can get, we can get as many projects as we think we can reasonably afford to get evaluated. Because I feel like that helps us in the end, even if a project doesn't sort of move forward as a 10-year plan priority, us having a better handle on the cost and scope of it that's just a positive feedback loop, and then we can put that in our long range plan. And then so next round, when we go forward, we're starting off from a better position on that project than we were currently. So my thought is we will probably spend, maybe 30 grand total on engineering for this. That's a guess at this point, but it's probably somewhere in that range. And I don't honestly know what that means in terms of how many projects they'll be able to evaluate. Is it 3 projects? Is it 8, 10? It's probably not going to be 15. But as we finalize these things, as we get an engineer on board, we'll be able to sort of clarify, what we're getting for our money. And then we'll build that short list to reach that point so that we get what we get the maximum that we can out of it.
Peter, did you have an addendum to that?
No, that answers the question.
My one question, I think it was question on item number 4. You said you're going to go outside and get some engineering cost estimates. What is that estimate over outside engineering firm doing it on their own? What is the cost savings for us?
What are the cost savings for us? I don't know that there are any cost savings for us other than I think it's a good use of our resources to get better cost estimates. Yeah, I mean, I would love to have, I would love to have an engineering firm look at all the projects in our long range plan that aren't in the 10-year plan already. And give us a better handle on the cost for those, because a lot of those costs are frankly, back of the envelope calculations. And are probably way off. And we're seeing that in a couple of places when we've sent a few of these projects to the DOT for the 10-year plan review. We've had them come back, order of magnitude higher in cost in some cases. And like last round with that Bartlett Street Bridge, they didn't even have enough information to make a guess about the cost of the project. So, the hope is that by having an engineer look at it earlier on, we can sort of avoid some of that and submit better projects to the 10-year plan, as well as get that feedback loop started, which is basically improving the information about the projects that are not in the 10-year plan, but are in our long range plan. So,
Okay. All right, thank you. Before I turn this over to Scott, if you're going to ask a question, please put your hand up so people aren't talking over other folks. Scott, you have the floor. Long range transportation plan update.
Alrighty. Well, the main thing that we wanted to talk about in terms of long range transportation plan update is going over the draft survey instrument for a public input survey. And I emailed that just yesterday afternoon. So we want to run through that draft, get some initial feedback from the TAC. This won't be your only bite at this apple. We'll talk a little bit more about that afterward. But so our progress on the long range plan update has been a bit halting, I'd say, over the last 6 months. You'll recall that we did the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis discussion with the TAC back at I think it was the October meeting, in conjunction with the TAC input session that we had for our MPO planning review. We've had I guess a number of other projects that have sort of been taking up an unusual amount of staff time between the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Study and the Age-Friendly Communities Initiative and our Greenway projects with the Park Service and so forth. So those have created both some time conflict as well as some survey scheduling issues. Both the Age-Friendly Communities Initiative and actually the Housing Needs Assessment that Sarah's working on have had a number of surveys in the field, and we've wanted to not have too many different RPC branded surveys in the field, creating confusion at one time. But those are nearing completion now. 5 of the 6 age-friendly communities surveys have been, will be wrapping up, we think, in the next couple of weeks. There's one more community in Hampton where we still need to get that survey in the field. But I think the housing needs assessment survey has been out for some time now as well, and will likely be wrapping up soon. So I think our goal with this is to get some feedback here today, and from you or other TAC members over the next couple of weeks by email, and then polish this survey instrument, bring it back for a second review at the May TAC meeting, and then be able to field it in June. So typically for each of the major updates to the long range transportation plan, we've done a public input survey of this sort. And that draft that I sent yesterday, and I'll share screen and bring that up in just a minute. But that draws on several of the prior RPC MPO surveys that we've done in years past, as well as some material from other similarly sized MPOs. Surveys used by those entities. And we found some what we think are useful questions there. But the last major update that we did to the long range plan was in 2017. And for that update, we had the advantage of being able to draw on survey results from the big coordinated survey that all 9 regional planning commissions did for the Granite State Future Initiative, where all 9 of us contracted with UNH Survey Center, did a very large sample telephone survey, random sample telephone survey statewide. I want to say there were 2,400 responses statewide, and we got 400 or so in our region. We did talk with UNH Survey Center to understand what the cost would be to work with them again this year and do another telephone survey. And their cost structure has gone up quite a bit in recent years, particularly as more and more people take advantage of caller ID and don't answer the phone when they don't recognize the number or when the number is a survey. So actually what we were hearing from UNH is that for a telephone survey, a 10-minute telephone survey, the cost would be $39,000. 50 or 15-minute survey, the cost would be up closer to $60,000. So what we're proposing to do with this is an online survey. It would not be a random sample, but our hope is that we can distribute this widely enough throughout the region that while we have a non-random sample, we will have a large enough sample that it will really provide some useful information for us. So I think the goal would be that this will be primarily distributed online. We would have paper copies available, and we could make sure there are a few paper copies available in each community, say at town hall. And if folks wanted to get in touch with us, we could send out copies too. Let's see. So why don't I share screen and we can look at the first cut that we have, and feel free to bring up comments as we go. And then we can have further discussion afterward. Is everybody able to see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So at this point, we have 21 numbered questions. There are several of the questions here that have subparts. We haven't yet timed this, and that's something that we'll do. We'll run through it at the staff level, but probably also give it to some folks that aren't involved with transportation planning and have them run through it and just test it and see how long it takes them. And to the extent that any of you are willing to do that for us, that would be helpful to get your feedback. Most of the demographic information we save till the end, but we do start out with city or town where the respondent lives. And then if you work outside of your house, what city or town do you work in? And then we have a multi-part question here, just asking respondents to describe their level of satisfaction with various aspects of the transportation system. This is largely modally based. In past years, the question, rather than asking about satisfaction, the question has been evaluating the quality or condition of each of these modes. And in looking at examples from a number of other MPOs, they use this satisfaction scale, which we think probably is more useful in terms of public opinion as to whether adequate resources are being invested in each of these areas. Tim and Red, you both, Tim, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, Scott, thanks. Just a general comment in going through the survey, which I think is really good, in terms of the number of references to EV charging.
Yep.
This is just a suggestion, but in terms of getting kind of to the crux of the problem with regards to that, I'm assuming that you might want to add a word or two. I mean, the issue is essentially that we don't have any EV charging.
Yeah.
So you might want to add, for instance, to question 3, item I, reference to availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
Okay.
I mean, that's basically the crux of the problem, so.
Okay,
All right, so it would be, yes, so they would be very either satisfied or dissatisfied with the availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Okay, that makes sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can probably expand that to all of these to some degree, just like the availability of bike paths and shoulder bike routes, availability of sidewalks, those kind of, I'll probably up and down that.
okay, great comment. Brad?
So I would put all of the road, highway, bridge questions together, because my question when I looked at A was, how do you define condition? Is it pavement? Is it congestion? Is it perception of safety? And if you put all those together as a user, you'll see that and be able to then figure out how you want to answer those as a block. And then, if you look at B and C, we're just saying, are you satisfied with, bike paths, shoulders, bicycle routes, sidewalks and crosswalk areas? But then we ask public transportation availability. And my question is, are we interested in availability? Are we interested in quality? Are we interested in quantity? They're asking different, they're different questions depending on the type of mode. And so if there's consistency across the board, I think we need to try to maintain that. And I understand that's not easy.
Okay, good point. Yeah, let me give some thought to that and I'll follow up with you on how we might phrase that.
Okay, thanks.
Scott, I couldn't figure out how to put my town under your auspices. Yeah.
So what we're, I sort of glossed over that. I think what I had in mind here is that in the online version, we just have a drop-down box with all of the towns in the region. And so you could select your town. I mean, we could just list them all out and you could pick which one is yours. Or we could just have a drop-down box in the online version, and for the paper version, we could just have a fill in the blank. We could either do it with town or with zip code. I think the only hitch with zip code is what Exeter and Kensington share a zip code. There are a couple of instances where two towns share a zip code.
We can also use a map too, like drop a pin on a map.
True.
We can do that as well.
Okay. All right. So Danya and Lucy, let me go to you, but let me also say if the questions you have relate to the questions that we've gotten to thus far, or if they're later in the survey. If they're later in the survey, let's hold them till we get to that. But Danya.
Unmute.
Danya?
Yes, no, I was going to try to put my hand down. It's a later question, so I'll wait. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. Lucy.
Mine relate to the question 3, similar to Rad's comments, was when you're looking at traffic safety and control on major roads. I think, as you know, if you're going to group them, maybe group them with the 2 you have up there now, A and G or whatever. But and then I just thought as a separate thing, because I know you've had all the RPCs and that different concerns about having bike paths as opposed to routes on roads. So I almost think that's a separate question, but I mean, as you know, it's not easy to develop any sort of survey and get everything you want, but just give maybe some thought to that as well. So.
Okay,
Does that make
thanks.
sense? Yep.
Yeah, it does. We So it sounds sort of similar to what Rad was talking about, that just as we're splitting out different aspects of the highway system, perhaps we need to be splitting out different aspects of the transit system or the non-motorized network.
Tim, do you have a question?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. So question 4 is question where we're essentially asking, in question 3, we've asked people to rate existing conditions and satisfaction with existing conditions. Question 4, we're looking for people's input on priorities for investments going forward. And so the way we've asked this question in prior surveys has been the way it appears in 4A here, but we've actually shown 3 different ways we could phrase this. Our intention would just be to pick one of those, not all 3 of them, but 4A asks this question and asks respondents to just rate the importance of each of investments in each of these modal areas on a 1 to 5 scale from most important to least important. 4B asks people to do sort of a drag and drop prioritization process. What's most important, what's second most important, third, et cetera. And so this is based on the way DOT actually handled a similar question in the statewide survey that they did for the 10-year plan. The other, and this is a functionality in online surveying that we haven't had in prior years. DOT has it through MetroQuest. We now have it through public input. We didn't really have this same sort of prioritization function in SurveyMonkey, which we've used in years past. The other interesting option that SurveyMonkey presents is to do this as a budgeting question, where respondents are invited to assign a percentage of an overall budget, a hypothetical budget, to each of these areas. Certainly it'll be interesting to see. Folks will have really varying levels of understanding of just what it costs to maintain the existing system, for example. But this in some ways gives us a greater, gives us more information than either of the other 2 approaches, because with the rating 1 to 5 scale, you could have somebody that goes through and says, well, all of them are a 5, and that doesn't really help us all that much. In the prioritization, something might appear above another area, but we don't have a sense for how much more important somebody thinks that is. So I think Dave's and my inclination would be to try this budgeting function, but we're certainly open to input from the TAC on how to approach this. So that format, how we format the question, how we structure the question, is one area of input. And then along the lines of discussion we just had on 3, we're also looking for input on what are the different lines we're asking people to rate and how to phrase those. Danya, is this the one that you were looking at?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, so just a comment and then a question for consideration. From my personal experience with surveys, we have found that when you're asking for information, the way you present it in 4B generally would give you the best number of responses. And the reason I say that is that when it's already spelled out and they can then look at it all at once, they can then decide in their own opinion what their priorities are. When you are given having to calculate a percentage of a budget, which, by the way, the second comment I have is, shouldn't the budgetary kind of question be separate to the prioritization of the different items. So asking for percentage calculations may not be as receptive. Right? That's the only thing I wanted to say.
Okay, so essentially the percentage calculations complicates the matter too much for people.
That's been my experience. Not
Okay.
just that, but we're also secondarily, and I see that you don't have that, which is great. You don't ask people to give specific comments, which would also complicate the qualification of those comments relative to others.
Okay. Yeah, we do have an open-ended question at the very end, but at this point, we have not put a comments question, other comment question, open-ended questions in the middle.
Yeah.
Well,
I see
the
that.
public input does allow us to have an open-ended sort of response in addition to, like, for this prioritization question, we could leave an open-ended question at the bottom for additional comments. And sometimes that's helpful too.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not helpful. Forgive me if that's the impression I've given.
No.
But I do think that sometimes it is interesting to get people to give their input in a written format. It's just then harder to collate and then compare it to other comments
Right.
as well.
Okay.
Tim has a question.
Tim?
Actually, yeah, it was just a comment to follow on with what Daniel was referring to. I guess I'm not sure how many people would be willing to spend the extra time to go through and assign those percentages to each one of the options and just kind of take the extra time to make sure the arithmetic works and everything. So I'm wondering if it might be, too much to ask for.
Okay. Yeah, potential for people just to get bogged down there and perhaps throw in the towel on the survey. All right, Lucy.
I was just gonna say, basically support what Danya and Tim just said, because I mean, I think in some ways it's a good exercise, but then, once again, it's people in the math and, the reality is they may say you should put 100% towards whatever category they like, but in reality that can't happen. I mean, it's good to have some better understanding of what monies are available, but I think it could get a little complicated for people. So I certainly appreciate both the comments that have been made. So once again, it's never easy to develop a survey that's going to address all the needs and try to make it easy for everybody. But I think those are all very good comments.
Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I would also probably be consistent with the word of improving for as many of these as possible. For example, expanding public transit service. Does that mean geographically? Does that mean frequency? Improving lets you be more general in your response to that.
Okay.
That works for rail service too. It could work for traffic congestion. It could also work for options for seniors and people with disabilities.
Okay, good point.
Thanks.
Scott, is it possible and/or will it work to just have 100% and then just say maintaining the highway and bridge network? That's probably 60%. Improving electric vehicle charging, that's probably at 10%. Improving road and intersection safety, that's got to be 60%. And this is a percent of 100, not totaling 100. Could that conceptually work? And then you'd get rid of what Tim's concern was, everybody doing their math.
I do think that the function in public input does the math for you and lets you know how many, as you assign, it lets you know what you have left to assign. So I don't think that somebody would need to be doing math in their head, but the point is well taken that does become a much more complicated exercise than doing a rank order exercise.
Not that it's complicated, it's cumbersome.
Yeah. So I was just looking up the actual on public input, how those budget questions work. And the way they have it working is you have to assign a cost So you would, so say your budget is 100 for all of these things, you would assign a cost to maintaining the highway and bridge network. And so then you would have to pick your choices to try to use up the whole budget. And it does calculate how much you've used, but you would basically say, okay, so I want to select, maintaining the highway and bridge network, electric vehicle charging, and road and intersection safety. And that uses up your whole budget. So you're done. So I don't think this works the way I thought it worked when I suggested this to Scott. So we'll take another look at what might be the best way to implement this. And I think there might be a room for a separate question on that, but it doesn't work the way I thought it worked. So
Could it work the way I suggested, David?
It might, yes.
Oh, you just overrode Scott. Ooh.
So, well, I think we'll have to look into this a little bit more on how we do it. And maybe I think, the thought of keeping the prioritization question for basically 4B, I think that maybe is approach with maybe another question, talking about budgeting and how people might use it as a separate question that maybe would get some of those, but it'll also depend on how many questions overall we're asking and how long it takes to fill it out. Because we don't want people to have to spend a half an hour doing this. We want it to be 5 to 10 minutes, that kind of thing. So we have to be conscious about that. So, but maybe we split this into 2 questions with one of them being optional kind of thing.
Peter? You're on, buddy. If you want to.
My mute didn't unmute. Okay, so I just want to put in a bit for 2 considerations. One is that if you're planning to do paper, the option B is a lot easier. You can put a little line next to it and people can write down 1 through 11 what they got. The problem is it doesn't give you weighting. It gives you an inverse point value for each number you put down, but it makes it a lot easier as a poll taker as opposed to a poll analyzer, which I have not done. It's a lot easier to use that both online by, as Dave says, clicking and dragging it into position. That takes a very small amount of time and on paper. And I think that one of the things that you're looking at in 4C, you don't, that people will skip that if they have the paper version. Or put down a few, large values like 60, 40, or whatever on a couple of them. But to try to evaluate 11 of them, where you have 9 percentage points per, answer. So my vote would be for the B option, just for simplicity's sake.
Okay, points well taken. Thanks.
Anybody else? Going. Go ahead, Scott.
All righty. So then we ask a question about primary commute mode, and then a secondary question about how often do you use each of these other modes, whether for commuting purposes or just for other trips. Ask a question about how long is your commute. We've seen this question framed either in minutes or in miles. And the thought is that, if you're saying in minutes, then you're essentially that miles gives us sort of clearer information here. Lucy.
Oh, and going back to question 5 and 6, I'm not trying to be critical, but as I look at these and you have journey to work data and all of that, I'm not sure if you're trying to, I think the questions are important in a way, but I think they're almost redundant. And I think I think you already know the answer to most of this. And with 5, you probably get most of the people click drive alone. I would assume you'll get most of them will be that. So you almost already know that. So I'm just wondering if there's a better question to replace these 2 somehow, just to get more out of your survey. Just a thought as I'm, looking through this and, thinking of that. And then even 2, how many times, rarely, once a week. And then number 7, as far as your commute, is that if I were taking that, I'd be going, is that a 1-way, 2-way? So once again, I think some of that information is generally available for the region. So I'm just wondering if there's some other way to extract some of that type of information and get more of what you're looking for. Because I think you're just going to get more generalized information from this.
I think that the idea of asking the question here is, in part, we want to be able to understand, is the response that we're getting, is our pool of respondents roughly analogous to the pool that we see from the census data? Or do we have a skewed pool of respondents? I think another consideration is that the census data now, the journey to work data, is coming out of the American Community Survey. And the sample size in the American Community Survey, particularly when you get to small towns, the sample size is so small that the margins of error are extremely high. So we have some concerns about the American Community Survey data and its quality in general, but we want to be able to compare the responses. We want to be able to compare the profile of our respondent pool to the profile of the region that we have through the census data. But I hear you. I mean, we're anticipating that, you know, just as with the region as a whole, the vast bulk of respondents are going to say drive alone. Although now, as opposed to 5 years ago, I expect that we'll see a much higher number of people saying telecommute here as well.
Yeah, I think the advantage of asking these questions now is that the pandemic has definitely changed patterns, and we can get maybe a snapshot of how things are now versus the ACS, which is relying on data and surveys from several years ago now. So I think that's helpful. We may want to just tweak this a little bit to maybe capture those people who are, you know, telecommuting, you know, consistently, you know, more than just once a week, but are doing it every day. But I think a lot between the number of people that have changed jobs and adjusted where they, you know, moved and or changed jobs during the pandemic and both potentially, I think we might see a little bit of a different pattern than what we've had in the past. But also I recognizing in number 7, we already have asked in 1 and 2 where people live and where they work, or which towns they live and work. And so if we can have that information in sort of town and state, that can give us their commute distance roughly. So, which is probably, we could get rid of that question.
Yep, that's a good point. I think that they'll involve some calculation, but yes, in the interest of paring down, we could get rid of 7.
Yeah. Yeah, and GIS should be able to help us with those calculations easy enough.
Yep. Then 8 just gets at the question of, you know, if you were no longer able to drive, whether permanently or temporarily, or if you prefer not to drive, how would you get where you need to go? Then we have a pair of questions about purchasing alternative fuel vehicles. The first one is broad brush in terms of alternative fuel vehicles. The second one is specific to electric vehicles. Tim?
Yeah, regarding the choices in question number 9.
Yep.
I'm thinking that biofuel or flex fuel vehicle, I guess I'm not exactly sure how many people would probably choose that option, given the fact that I'm assuming that you're basically talking, you know, restricting the survey to people who are driving light duty cars and trucks. So, I mean, there are some options when you get into like medium or heavy duty, but I think if you were to not use that second option and still have the final choice, which is other alternative fuel vehicles, I think that would probably be a good idea. Plus, for the second last choice, you might just want to call it a full battery electric vehicle, and that would probably make it a little bit clearer on, you know, what you're actually talking about there. So.
Okay. Yeah, good input on biofuel or flex fuel. That's something. This question, we had borrowed the wording from a survey done by the MPO up in Portland, Maine, I think. And it was a number of years old. But really, we are asking these questions. I think we're looking for information primarily about market penetration for electric vehicles. So
yeah, I mean, definitely light duty. Yeah.
Biofuel question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Peter.
I just had a question, a technical question, and it really applied to number 7 more than anything else. But what happens if a person doesn't answer a question? 7 was a question that if you aren't a commuter like me, retired, there's not applicable there. If I just did not answer that because I'm not a commuter, would the survey system set up so that it would ask me to, you know, please answer all questions, or would it allow me to go on to the next question?
I think your point about having a not applicable option there is a good one, or if we end up dropping that. But typically we don't set the survey tool to require answers to questions. And just would allow people to go on to the next question without answering.
Okay, thanks.
But to avoid confusion, you know, if we were to keep this question, I think that really should have a not applicable option.
Right.
So that people, you know, don't.
They can answer it.
Get bothered by that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brad.
In 10, you can answer as many of those as you want.
Yes, good point.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you could set it either way. You could set either choose 1 or choose 3 or choose all that apply kind of thing, you know. So we would probably check all that apply.
And this would be formatted so that other is at the end there.
Lucy, you had a question?
As we were talking about that, when I was just thinking, is that a question where it might be good to have them sort of rank what the, you know, where you could put like price is the most important thing, range, you know, have the survey question structured where you respond to it differently, similar to like you did before.
Okay.
I was just thinking out loud there. So
Yeah, that's a potential option.
yeah. And just on number 9, do we want to say purchase / lease? Because I know a lot of people don't buy cars anymore; they just lease them.
Yeah.
So I mean, technicality, but you know, some people go, I'm not going to buy the car; I'm going to lease it, so I'm not really buying it. You know.
Yeah, that's a good qualifier.
Plus size of vehicle, Scott.
What's that?
Plus size of vehicle.
Oh, size of the vehicle as an obstacle potentially.
Yes.
Almost.
Does that work, Richard? Combining it?
Yes, sir.
All right. This question about describing the neighborhood or the area where you live, we had originally used this in an earlier survey that was both transportation and land use, and it gets a little more to land use, but our thought was that having this information would give useful context in terms of people's responses, particularly about interest in transit, interest in bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Because if you live out in a low density rural area, the potential of you know, being able to get where you need to go by walking or bicycling or transit is significantly lower than if you're living in town. So the thought was that there was a benefit to keeping this question in there to provide some context on where respondents live and therefore what options are viable for them. Paul?
2 and 3 can be combined. Distance from or close to.
Okay, let me just say, we could potentially combine them. I was thinking of, for example, in Durham, where I live, there are subdivisions that are out off of Packers Falls Road that aren't really close to anything. So it's a neighborhood, but it's not practical to walk from there to downtown. But I live in a neighborhood that's a 5-minute walk from downtown. And so wanting to have some distinction between those two types.
Okay. Point taken. Paul?
Thanks, Richard. I'm looking at question 10, where you offer the other to please specify. Is there a place where someone who does have something else to offer can type that in? Is that supposed to be down at 21? Looks like you're giving a free space down there for someone to type some information in, but it looks like it's a little bit more focused than question number 10.
So up on 10, we do have this other option, but just the way the formatting went here, the other didn't end up at the end. And so we would want to leave space or on each of the questions. For the paper version, we'll want to leave space to make sure that if somebody does write other, there's
A place for them to do it.
a place for them to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Lucy?
Since we're on that question, is the word significant appropriate, or is it just, do we want to say obstacle? Because if you say the word significant, it implies that it is significant, and it may be a factor, but it may not be significant. So which of the following do you see as, I don't know if the word significant or even obstacle, which of the following do you see as, what's the word?
Just obstacles.
As not barriers. I just thinking maybe a different word. Okay, take out significant. Which of the following do you see as factors to purchasing rather than as obstacles? Because they may not be considered. You're almost implying that it's negative already, where there's a say a factor.
God, you're good.
Impediment, yeah, just something else. And certainly don't take my comments as critical. I would love someone, if I were making a survey, to do the same thing, because everybody has a different perspective when they're putting thoughts down initially. So,
Lucy, we are not proud, Lucy.
So we may need to.
Significance is certainly open to interpretation, and
right.
Obstacles does include an assumption that there are reasons that people wouldn't want to do this.
So we're fast approaching 11 o'clock. So we may have to sort of short circuit this conversation a little bit and maybe have people send us any comments that they have.
Okay, let me run through just quickly through 12 and 13. So 12 just sets out a case that the highway fund, both at the state level and federal level, have not kept pace with expenses, and asking people about their views on potential new sources of revenue. 13 is specific to the local option fee, and we can add the RSA reference here, but essentially the fee that municipalities are enabled under the RSAs to charge to generate revenue for local transportation needs. And so here we ask about respondents' openness to paying that fee if it was used for specific types of transportation uses. And then we have our whole list of demographic questions. But just briefly to go back through here, looking at this, I think if we were to use this, I would probably drop this qualifier. don't raise taxes and fees, reprioritize and delay, even if that means higher construction costs, because we don't really have that kind of aside comment on any of the others.
Good point.
I don't know if it's even worth having the adopt a broad-based sales tax, because that's certainly one that we know what the response is going to be in New Hampshire. Lucy, you have a quick question on this? And then maybe,
Oh, I'm sorry, I should raise my hand, no, lower my hand, sorry.
okay. So at any rate, as Dave said, I will incorporate the changes we just talked about, resend this around, take a look. If you have additional thoughts, send them to us in the next week, ideally, 2 weeks at the outside, and then we can.
Can we send a separate page, Scott?
What's that?
My apologies, Scott. May we send each page as a separate page, or do we have to send the whole document back to you?
Oh, if you only have comments on one page, feel free to send that.
Can we isolate that page, Scott?
What's that?
That's what I was asking, Scott. Can we isolate that page and send it back to you?
Certainly.
Okay.
I mean, what may be easiest, I can send it to you. I think I sent it yesterday as a PDF.
Yes.
I can send it out as a Word doc. And if you, we can just set it up with track changes. If you want to suggest specific edits, and you can just email me back the Word doc. And then you're not either mailing or faxing or doing anything with handwritten.
Okay, good.
Danya.
Yeah, very quickly, I'm not sure if you were going to cover this, but how will you be distributing the questionnaire? And one of the suggestions I had for you to consider is maybe using Nextdoor to get folks in specific counties or towns. It's quite an impressive, it's become quite an impressive tool for feedback, but we don't have to discuss it now. We can discuss it at another time if you were thinking of ways to, and also in Rye, for example, you can share this questionnaire with the Rye Civic News team, and they would post it, and it would be very well, they have a broad and deep reach within Rye. So just a suggestion, we can talk another time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically with surveys like this, we try to get them posted, linked through town websites in each town, through public libraries, to go out in Friday updates if a town has something like that. And then we've also sought to get them distributed through informal town Facebook pages. At times we've actually paid to target residents of specific communities using Facebook to get it in front of people. And then we would put out a press release. And so we would certainly appreciate input on what you think are the best ways to get it circulated in your respective communities.
Great, happy to help.
All right. Any other thoughts at this point?
We've got 10 minutes for one more question. Nope, going, gone, Scott. David, I have a question for you. If you can see what I'm holding up here. The New Hampshire 10-year plan that you sent out?
Oh, yep, that's our guidance. Yep.
Can you see how it's printed?
Okay.
3/4 of the page is printed, 1/4 is not.
All right. I'll look at that and see.
And that's on all the pages.
Okay. I'll see if that's something I can replicate here. I just printed out part of it the other day, and it printed out full pages. So I wonder if it's maybe your printer, but I'll try again on this end.
Okay.
Mine did print full page, just as a reference.
Okay.
Mine too.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I can look like an ass on my own.
Oh, no, okay, I'm hanging up now.
Yeah, you're done. Anything else, folks? David, you have anything else?
I am going to, I'm putting together an email right now that I'll send out to TAC members right after the meeting that will include a link to the presentations from today's discussion, as well as all the materials for the TAC meeting on our website. And it'll include on that, I'll include the project updates memo that we do. So, and I don't know, we have what, how much time? 5 minutes? You know, in terms of project updates, the one thing that I want to point out, more of a personal goal, is that the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Assessment that we've been working on for the last 2 years is finished. It's
Ooh,
done
nice.
and published. And so I'm pretty excited about that. I've been talking to a number of the communities sort of after we finished it already. Went to Hampton Falls last night, or wait, Tuesday night, talked to the planning board, going to Hampton Planning Board in the middle of May. Have already talked to a number of other people. So it's the turnout, the feedback has been good that we've been getting. And I think it's a big step for us in understanding the impacts on the transportation network.
If it's any consolation, David, you were well received in Hampton Falls.
All right, thanks. Yeah, the planning board was really engaged in that. So it was good to have that sort of back and forth conversation. So
Nice job.
thanks.
Anybody else? Going. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Yes, thank you, everyone. And yeah, look for an email with some updated documents and information from us.
Thanks,
All right.
Scott.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of
good
your
day.
day.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, everyone.